Alright, good evening to the young people. This quarter, we're actually almost at the end of this quarter. Last week and next week will be at the end of the quarter. But this quarter, we've been talking especially and exclusively to young people. And we talked about some faith affirming things, who God is, what God does, how we should show our faith. More recently, we've we've been talking about more of the practical side of things, like how am I to live, drinking, tobacco, pornography. We've talked about all of those things, and tonight is no different. I want to talk about marriage, divorce, and remarriage. Now, there's a lot of stigma behind this, a lot of disagreements in the church, a lot of deep studies we could do, and we're not going to do that tonight, young people, because Jesus keeps it simple for us. We're going to go back to what Jesus intended. What did Jesus intend in Matthew 19? Matthew 19, start reading with me in verse number 1. And it came to pass, when Jesus had finished these things, he departed from Galilee and came to the region of Judea beyond the Jordan. And great multitudes followed them, and he healed them there. Then the Pharisees also came to him, testing him and saying to them, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason? This is based on their understanding of the old law in Deuteronomy 24, which said basically if your wife burnt the toast, you can divorce her. But without going far into that, we want to keep it simple this evening. Let's go to what Jesus begins to answer here. Jesus sets the record straight in three specific ways. Here he says first, what is God's design? He says this. And he answered and said to them, have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female? And that for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Alright, God's beautiful, perfect design is that one man would take one woman for life. The two shall become one flesh. That's established all the way in the garden in Genesis chapter 2. One man, one woman for life, and they both have different roles. We'll end in just a minute in Ephesians 5, but that's God's design. So the Pharisees, verse 6, I didn't finish that. So then they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let not man separate. So, one man, one woman, they're not supposed to separate. The Pharisees ask about divorce. Well, if this is the case, Jesus, why did Moses permit us to get us divorced? He says, for the hardness of your heart. And then he gives, uh, in verse 8, he says, it is because of the hardness of your heart that Moses permitted you to put them away. Then he says the rule. If anyone divorces his wife, whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery. And whoever marries her who is divorced commits adultery. The rule is clear in verse 9. Jesus says, if you divorce, you have broken the covenant, young people. Get married, stay married. If you divorce, you've broken the covenant. People talk about the exception, and we're going to talk about that next. But the rule is don't get a divorce. Notice what Jesus says in verse 6 again, what God has joined together, let not man separate. The court system hasn't joined you together. God did. Of course, there's this exception. Except it be for fornication, he says, for literal, actual adultery, cheating. You can uh, put your mate away. You can divorce. You can break that covenant. Why? Because that covenant has been broken intimately by cheating. And God puts that uh, rule up there. God is merciful enough to allow us this exception. If somebody violates your marriage, you are allowed to remarry without it being adultery. Why am I talking to young people about this? Why am I talking to you about this? Do you realize that you, Christian, you young Christian, are already married? You say, no, I'm not. You're married to Christ and the church. If you're a member of the church, you're married to Christ. We need to be people who honor marriage. Here's the real goal of marriage: to model Christ and His church. Look at Ephesians 5:22 and 22 through 23. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, and also Christ is the head of the church. He is the Savior of the body. Therefore, just as the church is subject to Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify her and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word, that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy, without blemish in love. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies, for he who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as he does the Lord. For we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones. For this reason, that angel giving quote Genesis 2. A man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let each of you in particular so love his own wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. What is the goal of marriage? To model Christ and the church. Husbands are to love their wives and cherish them just as Christ loved the church. In your marriage to Christ, you are modeling what your relationship, uh, what your relationship with your spouse is going to be. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Find a wife. Find a wife that you will love and sacrifice for as Christ did his church. That's a tall order. Wives, submit to your husband just as he does, just as you do to Christ. Yes, we've talked about divorce here a little bit, the exception. But make no mistake about it, just because divorce happens, young people, uh, marriage is a blessing from God. In Genesis 2:18, when Adam was first created, it was not good for him to be alone. Marriage is good. Marriage is supposed to fulfill our deepest need. And when we do it right, we're going to have a living picture of Christ and his church. So don't worry about the divorce stuff we talked about. Worry about being the best husband or the best wife you can be one day so that you can model the sacrificial love and the mutual submission that Christ has for the church. If we do that, we can deeper appreciate our relationship to Christ as it relates to the church. Thank you all for being here. Next week, I plan on wrapping up my study with personal evangelism. How do we go out and share everything we've learned? Please join me for that study here next week. God bless.